All right, guys, we're going to be in Matthew 23, verses 1 through 12 today. So go ahead and give it a read, see what you get from it. I want you to specifically look at how Jesus describes the action of the Pharisees, and I want you to think about what's different in the way that Jesus is ministered versus the way he accuses the Pharisees of doing ministry. And then once you do that, come back for some commentary. All right, so Matthew 23 continues with Jesus just kind of on an all-out assault against the hypocritical Pharisees at this point. He sees the damage that they're doing. He sees how these supposed ministers of God are taking advantage of the people for their own gain. And the time is over where Jesus he's not mixing his words. He is just directly accusing them of the wrong that they're doing. And now Jesus' first statement here can be a little bit confusing. He says they sit on Moses' seat, so be careful to do everything that they tell you, but then don't do what they do. It almost seems, as if Jesus is saying listen to them, but then don't do what they do. It's a little confusing, seems odd, but this is what Jesus is saying. He's saying that the Pharisees are the teachers of the law, and the source material that they're teaching from is good. As much as they're teaching from the Old Testament, as much as they are reading the scriptures of the Old Testament, the people should listen and obey because the Old Testament is God's word. However, Jesus notices that the Pharisees do not practice what they preach from God's word, and therefore their actions should not be mimicked and should not be followed. Jesus kind of explains this a little more in verse 4. He says that they've added to God's word through their own traditions and through additional man-made laws, and it become a burden to the average person. The Pharisees taught that God expected much, much more from the people than he had actually said the people needed to do. And it was so much more that the Pharisees taught that the people would be unable to keep up with all of it. I mean, if there's hundreds, if there's thousands of these little everyday ceremonies and traditions and laws and observances that you had to keep up with, I mean, the average person that worked a job and raised a family and wasn't spending all their time in the temple, the average person would not be able to come up and keep all of these little things that the Pharisees had added on. And what made it even worse is as they added all these additional guidelines, they in turn did nothing to help offer any advice or to offer any help for the people to keep these laws. They just spoke the words and then expected the people to somehow interpret it for themselves and apply it to their lives. Jesus then moves to begin shining a bit of a light on the heart and the intentions of the Pharisees. He says that they have no real desire to draw closer to God, nor to minister to the people. Instead, everything they're doing is designed to draw attention and praise from the people to themselves. Jesus says some translations call it a phylactery, and this is an oversized prayer box that they would wear on their head and keep little verses of scriptures and prayers, and it would signal to the people that if this box was that big, it must be full of scriptures and full of prayers, and therefore they must be so righteous if they're going around with these scriptures and prayers every day. It says that they wore these righteous ornaments that were very visible to the people, easy to see on their garments as their tassels were oversized. And so they desired places of honor. They desired the most important seats, and they loved positions and titles that boosted their pride and ego. And Jesus reminds them that they are not supposed to be in this ministry. They're not supposed to be doing what they're doing for titles or honor, because titles and honor are meant to go to God. Any glory, any praise, any recognition is meant to be pointed at God, not to inflate our own egos. So therefore, what the Pharisees are doing, what they're doing here, it's not for God's glory, it's for their own glory. And so he says, because you have done these things, you'll be humbled one day, because those who are truly going to be great in God's kingdom is the humble servant. And then the person who spent their entire earthly life seeking out man's praise and honor, they're going to be humbled. And so as we close this out, let's think of a few practical points. One of the first ones that I think about is that true ministry doesn't often happen when we're seated at places of honor. If we surround ourselves with only the wealthy, only the powerful, only the popular, we don't often get a chance to fulfill Christ's mandate to serve those in need, to minister to the sick, to the lonely, and to the poor. And kind of practical even for pastors is that ministry isn't going to be most effective if we're always within the church walls. If our ministry is only on Sunday mornings, if we're not going out to the places where people need Jesus, our ministries won't always be the most effective. Secondly, we do well to remember that our service is, well, it's service. It's not for anything for our personal gain. It's not for us to be well-liked or respected or honored. It's not for our social media gratification to be able to post and show how good of people we are so that we get the likes that we want. Ministry is, and service is, meant to be mimicking the way that Christ served. We serve because Christ served first. We mimic his humble example as we show God's love to those around us.